One of the most important steps in preventing and addressing exclusionary behaviors is to ensure that we are all on the same page regarding how to recognize them. In this lesson, we will discuss the different types of exclusionary behaviors that can exist within a team environment and learn how to evaluate discrepancies between intent of those behaviors and their impact. We will begin with sexual harassment. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine compiled an extensive report in 2018 analyzing the prevalence of sexual harassment in these fields. The results were really chilling. They reported that organizational climate, and in particular institutional tolerance of harassment, is the greatest predictor of the occurrence of sexual harassment. They found that in higher education, 50 to 60% of women are sexually harassed across all levels, from the undergrad to the faculty level. In the most recent Association of American Universities Campus Climate Survey, 20 to 30% of men undergraduate and graduate students also reported experiencing sexual harassment. The report also found that trans and gender nonconforming people experience the greatest rates of sexual harassment and violence. So how do we address this major issue? First, we need to recognize that sexual harassment doesn't occur in a vacuum. And if an environment tolerates and supports sexual harassment, then other forms of exclusionary behavior, such as bullying and microaggressions, also exist. And data continually show that all forms of exclusionary behavior disproportionately impact individuals who are part of historically excluded groups in STEM. So in this lesson, we are going to focus first on identifying sexual harassment, bullying, and microaggressions. In the US, harassment is defined as unwelcome conduct based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, or genetic information. It's a form of employment discrimination that violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and Title IX of the Education Amendments. Sexual and other types of harassment are unlawful when either 1, enduring the offensive conduct is a condition of continued employment, or 2, the conduct is severe or pervasive enough that it creates an intimidating, hostile, or abusive environment. So this behavior can be one severe incident or multiple actions, which on their own may seem small and unimportant, but occur with such frequency that they create a hostile environment. Shown on this screen is a list of behaviors from the Marine Corps' Equal Employment Opportunity Office training that includes verbal, nonverbal, and actual physical actions. To clarify, this is not a comprehensive list of behaviors, but it does demonstrate that these behaviors may manifest in different ways. There may also be some cultural differences in the interpretation of some of these behaviors. But the key is that it is not the intent that matters, but the impact. And cultural differences can also be used as an excuse for misconduct. Moving forward, we need to focus on behaviors before they reach the legal definition of harassment and recognize that harassment does not have to be illegal to have damaging consequences. Continuing with the example of sexual harassment, psychologists actually have a much broader definition of that behavior, which includes a 3-part model illustrated by this image of the iceberg from the National Academies of Sciences report on sexual harassment. In the iceberg analogy, notice how some of the iceberg lives above the waterline. This represents public consciousness. But the majority of the iceberg lies below the waterline, representing behaviors that are less recognized or unrecognized as sexual harassment. At the tip of the iceberg analogy is sexual coercion. This behavior is exemplified by promising professional rewards in return for sexual acts, or threatening professional consequences unless sexual demands are met. This is the kind of sexual harassment that people recognize and makes headlines, yet researchers suggest it's the least common or frequent form of harassment. The next level of sexual harassment is unwanted sexual attention, which includes actions such as unwanted advances or touching, groping, inappropriate comments and stares, repeated non-reciprocal requests for a date or sex, and unwanted sexual discussions. Completely submerged in the iceberg analogy is the third type, identified as gender harassment. Researchers propose that this is the most common form of sexual harassment, but is least recognized by the public, even often by those who experience it, because it's not necessarily sexualized. Gender harassment includes conduct that denigrates or shows hostility, offensive remarks or images, gender slurs, or sabotage of someone's work because of their gender. The National Academy of Sciences report highlighted the importance of recognizing gender harassment behavior, because it may be happening daily, and tolerating these actions enables other types of sexual harassment further up the iceberg. This statement was key when reviewing the results of the Advanced Geopartnership Workplace Climate Survey. 14% of the over 2,000 participants who completed the survey reported experiencing sexual harassment at least once within the last 12 months. Gender harassment was the most experienced form of sexual harassment, affecting 97% of those who reported at least one behavior. Next, let's talk about bullying. In the US, there is no federal law that prohibits bullying among adults, and only 1 or 2 states have laws prohibiting adult bullying, even though research shows how prevalent it is and how damaging it can be to individuals and businesses. Bullying involves a real or perceived power imbalance and the use of force, threat, or coercion to abuse, intimidate, or aggressively dominate others in a professional environment. These actions can include abusive criticism, humiliation, spreading of rumors, physical and verbal attacks, isolation, undermining, and professional exclusion of individuals through any means. Bullying can be categorized into 4 different types: verbal bullying, social bullying, physical bullying, or cyberbullying. Can you match these different examples to their correct category? A third type of exclusionary behavior that needs to be addressed is microaggressions. The term microaggressions was originally coined in the 1970s by psychologist Chester Pierce, who used it to describe the daily racial offenses, dismissals, and insults lodged against African American people by non-Black Americans. The term microaggressions has since been redefined to encompass societal exclusion of any marginalized group of people. Similar to bullying, microaggressions have not been categorized as unlawful, but they still have very harmful impacts. Microaggressions are defined as the brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial, gender, sexual orientation, and religious slights and insults to a target person or group. We also include ableism, which is any action that favors able-bodied people, and ageism, which includes indignities based on age, in this conversation. In Module 6, we will further discuss identity lenses and how to develop strategies for keeping individuals of varied identities safe in the field. So to summarize, microaggressions can be unconscious or conscious, they can invalidate people's experiences, and they are often very subtle forms of bias and discrimination. Microaggressions can be categorized into 3 types. Microassaults are explicit derogatory comments or actions characterized primarily by a verbal or nonverbal attack with the intention to hurt through name-calling, exclusion, or purposeful discriminatory actions. These are most likely to be deliberate. Micro-insults are actions or statements that demean a person's identity. These often, but certainly not always, can occur as so-called subtle snubs to convey a hidden insult. Micro-invalidations are comments made to invalidate or undermine someone's experience, thoughts, or feelings related to their identity. Recognizing microaggressions as harmful is important for identifying them when they happen and responding to them appropriately. These are examples of spoken microaggressions, with specific examples for additional clarification. A handout with these statements is provided on the module below this reference, along with some communication strategies you can use to counter these microaggressions when they occur. An example of claimed colorblindness would be a statement of, "I don't believe in race," or "I don't see color." Sometimes the intent behind that statement is an attempt to show one is being fair-minded by eliminating the color difference. However, the impact that this statement has is different. This statement actually erases a key portion of a person's identity and dismisses their life experience. This brings us back to the previous statement regarding intent and impact. The overall message in many of these conversations is that when someone does something hurtful or offensive to another person, the perpetrator's intent is not what's most important when gauging the appropriateness of an action. In fact, many would say that it is inherently privileged to redirect the focus of a conversation to the perpetrator's presumably harmless intentions, rather than focusing on the feelings and experiences of the person who's been harmed. We need to focus much more on impact over intent when trying to create change in our workplace and everyday lives. This video that I'm going to show you now uses mosquito bites as an analogy for experiencing microaggressions. It's important to remember that at some point in our lives, we have all been a mosquito to someone else. If we want to prevent that from happening in the future, we have to do the work to educate ourselves on what microaggressions are. In this lesson, we've introduced what a microaggression is. Use the resources provided to help broaden your understanding of what these are and their impacts. Our next lesson will dive into strategies to address exclusionary behaviors if they occur.